Imagine you've just been handed the keys to a superpower, but it's on the absolute verge of total collapse. Well, that was the reality for the Roman Emperor Diocletian. So let's talk about how this one man managed to pull an entire empire back from the brink. You know, professional historians, they're not exactly known for throwing around words like awesome. So when a Yale professor uses it to describe a Roman emperor who lived almost 2,000 years ago, you gotta stop and ask, what on earth did this guy do to earn that kind of praise? Diocletian's story is the ultimate rags to riches tale. I mean, this guy was born the son of a former slave. He climbed his way up the military ladder with nothing but pure grit. But here's the thing. He wasn't just another soldier. He was a manager, an organizer, and he took charge of an empire that was, and I'm not exaggerating, completely falling apart. To really get what Diocletian accomplished, we first have to understand the absolute chaos he inherited. It wasn't just one problem he had to fix, it was a total, perfect storm of crises, all hitting at the exact same time. Welcome, my friends, to the crisis of the 3rd century. Seriously, for 50 straight years, from 235 to 284 AD, the Roman Empire was a living nightmare. We're talking nonstop war, a revolving door of assassinations, and a complete economic meltdown. For the people living through it, it must have felt like the end of the world. So what went so wrong? Well, you can boil it down to a triple threat. You had collapsing borders, a government in total freefall, and money that was becoming basically worthless. Let's dig into each of these, one by one. First up, the military threat. Over in the east, this new, aggressive Persian dynasty, the Sassanids, was just hammering the Roman provinces. At the exact same time, in the north, Germanic tribes like the Goths were pouring across the Rhine and Danube rivers. And listen, this wasn't just some minor border skirmish. Two Roman emperors, Decius and Valerian, were either killed in battle or died in captivity during this period. That was just unheard of. Okay, now let's talk about the chaos at the top. In just 50 years, more than 30 different men tried to call themselves emperor. Think about that for a second. 30 leaders in 50 years. How can you possibly run a country like that, let alone a vast empire? The real problem was succession. See, emperors were now just generals, and they were put in power by their armies. But those same armies would turn around and kill them for a quick cash bonus, a donative, from the next guy who wanted a shot at the throne. Things got so bad that Rome itself, a city that hadn't been seriously threatened in centuries, had to build a giant wall around itself for protection. That tells you everything. This leads us right to the money problem. The government was broke, but it had to pay all these soldiers. They couldn't borrow money, so what did they do? They started cheating. It's a little trick called a coin debasement. They just meant new coins with way less silver in them and hoped nobody would notice. Well, of course people noticed. And this kicked off a vicious downward spiral. The new, junky coins drove the old, good silver coins out of circulation because everyone was hoarding them. You know the old saying, bad money drives out good? With only worthless currency floating around, prices for everything just exploded. We're talking full-blown hyperinflation, ancient Roman style. And here's where it all comes together. This economic nightmare didn't just hurt the poor. It completely wiped out the local elites, the wealthy families who had been the backbone of the empire for hundreds of years. And when their money vanished, so did the funding for things like temples and civic life. This wasn't just an economic crisis. It was a social and religious crisis that shook the very foundations of Roman identity. So, in 284 AD, Diocletian steps into this mess. He wasn't some legendary general, but he was a master organizer. He took one look at the situation and knew the old system was broken beyond repair. He realized that saving the empire was going to require a revolution from the top down. And Diocletian was incredibly methodical. For every problem, he had a solution. Invasions? Let's double the size of the army. Runaway inflation? We're going to completely overhaul the tax system. And for the two biggest problems of all, the empire being too big for one man and the constant assassinations, he invented something completely new. He called it the tetrarchy, which is just a fancy Greek word for rule of 4. He split the empire into 2 halves, east and west. He ruled the east as the senior emperor, the Augustus, and appointed a co-Augustus for the west. Then each of them appointed a junior emperor, a Caesar, who would be their chosen successor. It was a brilliant idea, designed to create stability and a clear, peaceful line of succession. Diocletian also changed the very idea of what an emperor was. He wasn't the first citizen anymore, a kind of first among equals. Oh no. He became a distant, godlike figure. You didn't just meet with him, you had to bow down and worship him. The goal was simple: make the emperor so sacred, so divine, that no general would ever dare try to kill him. So, the big question, did it work? Diocletian launched this massive top-down revolution to fix everything. But what was the final result? Which of these radical ideas actually worked, and which ones failed, maybe even spectacularly? All right, let's look at his report card. In the success column, he absolutely secured the frontiers, and his tax reforms did stabilize the economy. He restored a sense of order that would last for almost 100 years. But then you look at the failure column. The Tetrarchy? It collapsed into civil war almost immediately after he retired. His attempt to fix prices by law, that just created a massive black market. And his brutal persecution of the Christians was a total costly failure. But here's the thing. Hindsight is 20/20, right? We can see the failures clearly now. But for the people living at the time, they were just incredibly relieved. They had lived through 50 years of pure chaos. Diocletian gave them peace. You see it right on their coins, a world restored. For them, he was a savior. And that brings us to the great irony of Diocletian. He wanted to bring back the good old days of Rome, but his changes were so radical, so sweeping, that he ended up creating a completely new kind of empire. He didn't just save Rome, he reinvented it from the ground up. And you can literally see this transformation. The whole center of gravity of the empire moved. The city of Rome wasn't really the center of the world anymore. New capitals like Milan and Trier became more important because they were closer to the frontiers where the action was. The empire that came out of this crisis was just a different beast, more militarized, more bureaucratic, and ruled by an openly autocratic, godlike emperor. So that's the core of his legacy. He absolutely succeeded in saving the Roman state from completely disappearing. But the state he saved wasn't the one he inherited. It was a new, different, harsher empire for a new, different, harsher world. So we're left with this one last big question. Diocletian was awesome. He saved a civilization. But in the process of saving the Roman Empire, did he end up destroying the very things that made it Roman in the first place? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me.